So let's talk about the Necron Dynasties Warhammer 40k Commander deck. Our commander is Zarek the Silent King. For 1 and 3 black, we have a 3/4 Necron with flying. Whenever it attacks, we're going to mill 3 cards, and we may put an artifact, creature card, or vehicle card from among the milled cards this way into our hand. So after reading that initially, I'm really into trying to make that effect or that ability go off as many times as I can. So immediately my mind is going to Strionic Resonator. This is an artifact where we can pay to copy target triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy, and a triggered ability says the words when, whenever, and at, and if we take a look at our commander, it says whenever Zarek the Silent King attacks. Perfect. But of course, we don't want this to just affect our commander. If you look at all of the creatures in this deck, I'm going to say 90% of them say whenever, starting with Anrak the Traveler. It says whenever. You don't even need to care what it's saying. I just look at if it says when, whenever, or at, so that meets it. The next one is Canoptek Scarab Swarm. When this enters the battlefield, perfect. The next one, Canoptek Spider. Whenever another non-token creature, I don't even care what it says. The next one, Canoptek Tomb Sentinel. When this enters the battlefield. Canoptek Wraith. When it deals combat damage. Again, it's meeting that mark. And that's just the top 6 cards in the creature category. And it's already meeting that when, whenever, or at that Strionic Resonator is wanting us to have that we can copy. But going back to our commander, why Strionic Resonator is really good for this is because whenever it attacks, we're going to get twice the amount that we normally do. So when this attacks, we mill the top 3 and we get to grab something that's an artifact creature or vehicle from it. But if we activate Strionic Resonator, what's going to happen is we do it the first time, so we mill 3, grab an artifact creature or vehicle, but only one of them from the first 3, and then we're going to do it again. We don't get to grab 2 of them from any of the 6 cards. So we mill 3, grab one of the selected, do it again, so we're milling another 3, and grab another one from there. And as I read, there was a lot of creatures that say whenever they enter the battlefield, so again, my mind goes directly to Panharmonicon. Whenever an artifact or a creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability among permanents you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So when they trigger, with Strionic Resonator, we're going to get another one, and Panharmonicon, when they enter the battlefield, we're going to get another triggered ability. So we're going to get a lot of value from this deck just from adding those 2 cards to this deck. Now since this is a very artifact heavy deck, I really recommend Shimmermere. So this lets us cast artifact spells as though they had flash. And this also has flash, so very cool. One creature I did want to mention is Technomancer. So this does cost 7 mana. It's a 5/1 Necron Wizard. When it enters the battlefield, we're going to mill 3 cards, then return any number of artifact creatures with total mana value 6 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield. If we have Panharmonicon or Strionic Resonator, we're going to be able to trigger this multiple times, and I love that. Moving on to the sorceries, there's actually some really sweet stuff in here. There's Beacon of Unrest, which makes total sense. We're going to have a lot of cards in our graveyard, so why not bring an artifact or creature back to the battlefield just for 5 mana? So we could have Technomancer on the battlefield for a reduction of 2 mana. There's Dread Return. This is specifically a creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield, but we can also have Flashback, where we sack 3 creatures and cast it without paying its mana cost, just sacrificing those 3 creatures, and then we're going to exile Dread Return. And Living Death is really sweet because we're going to take all of our creatures on the battlefield and swap them with all the creatures from our graveyard, and same for our opponents, so we really could put them in a horrible position. There's also Mutilate. I really like this one. For 2 and 2 black, it's a sorcery. For how many swamps we control at that time, we give all creatures -1/-1. So we could have 6 swamps, pay 4 mana, all the creatures we control and our opponents are going to get -6/-6. Then there's this card, Their Name is Death. For 6 mana, destroy all non-artifact creatures, which is going to be great for us, and potentially, and most likely horrible for our opponents. Their Name is Legion, so for X and 4 black, this is a lot of mana. X, tap 2/2 black Necron Warrior artifact creature tokens, then gain life equal to the number of artifacts you control. Exile this card. You may cast this from your graveyard, which is really sweet because we're just milling a lot of our cards anyways. It's likely we could mill this and not put it in our graveyard purposely. It will just happen. Moving on to Instants, I have never seen this card before, but it's called Darkness, and apparently it was printed in Legends, which is a very long time ago. So this is a fog, but for black. It says prevent all combat damage that be dealt this turn. Again, it's just for 1 black mana. Very sweet. And next is Defile. This is a great budget card, by the way. For 1 black, we give target creature -1/-1 for each swamp we control, which again, we can have 6 swamps on the battlefield, pay 1 black, and give a creature -6/-6. Moving on to the artifacts, we have Caged Sun, which is great if you're a monocolor deck, which is what we are. When it enters the battlefield, we're going to choose black, and creatures we control of the chosen color get +1/+1, and whenever a land causes us to add 1 or more mana of that color, we're going to gain an additional mana. So tapping a a swap now gets us 2 black mana, which is really good. Next is Convergence of Dominion. So I wanted to talk about this because it says as long as you control your commander, which hopefully we'll have our commander out on the battlefield, activated abilities of cards in your graveyard cost 2 less to activate. This ability can't reduce the mana of that ability's activation to less than 1. And then it has pay 3, tap it, mill 3 cards. From what I've seen in here, there wasn't a lot of ways we could take advantage of this, but still it's a really sweet card. Maybe we can use it in other decks outside of this, so I thought this was a really sweet printing. Next is Endless Atlas, so we can pay 2, tap it, draw a card if we control 3 lands of the same name, which is very likely when we have 30 swamps in this deck, it's going to be perfect. There's also Gilded Lotus that's put into this deck, so we pay 5 and we can tap it to add 3 mana of any one color, which will be black. They also put Mystic Forge in this deck, which is perfect because you can look at the top card of your library anytime, which is actually a sweet benefit if we couldn't have artifacts in this deck anyways, but you may cast artifact spells and colorless spells from the top of your library. We can also tap it to pay 1 life and exile the top card of our library, which if it's a land and we do not need it, we can just exile that and move on to the next thing, which is potentially another artifact we can cast from the top of our library. Next is Resurrection Orb. I really like this one. We can have this equipped to a creature. It has lifelink, and whenever that creature dies, we can return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. And that's going to trigger our ETBs, which is very important. Another great thing for monocolored decks is Scepter of Eternal Glory. It is a mana rock for 4. We can tap it to add 1 mana of any color, or we can get 3 of any one color if we control 3 or more lands with the same name, which again, 30 swamps in the deck. It's very likely we're going to have this activated. Next, let's move on to the enchantments. We have Biotransference. For 2 and 2 black, creatures you control are artifacts in addition to their other types. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. So this means in our graveyard or even in our library. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, you lose 1 life and create a 2/2 black Necron Warrior artifact creature token, which is going to be great because a lot of this deck is artifacts, so we're just going to get more tokens, more creatures that we didn't even have to really work for. Out of the Tombs for 2 and a black. At the beginning of your upkeep, put 2 Eon counters on Out of the Tombs, then mill equal to the number of Eon counters. If you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, instead return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. If you can't, you lose the game. I love this, and it's going to be really chaotic, especially if our opponent's just like, yeah, I'm going to exile your graveyard, and good luck at your upkeep, assuming we have no cards in our library. Anyways, this is a really sweet card, and I love this one. The last enchantment is the War in Heaven. For 6 mana, we have a Saga, so the first turn we have this, we're going to draw 3 and lose 3 life. The next turn, we're going to mill 3 cards. The last turn that we're able to use this, we're going to choose up to 3 target creature cards with total mana value 8 or less in your graveyard. Return each of them to the battlefield with a Necrodermis counter on it and their artifacts in addition to their other types. This is exactly what we want to be doing with this deck. We get card draw, we get to mill 3, which we're already going to have probably a huge graveyard by then, and then we're just going to grab 3 creatures with total mana value 8 or less and put them onto the battlefield. I love it. So I already mentioned a few of the upgrades I want to add to this deck, so let's talk about the rest of them. There's Peregrine Dynamo. So this is a creature where we can pay 1 and tap it to copy target activated or triggered ability you control from another legendary source that's not a commander. You may choose new targets for the copy. So this can trigger Anrak that I mentioned before. Whenever this attacks, you may cast an artifact spell from your hand or graveyard by paying life equal to its mana cost rather than paying its mana. This can be very powerful because whenever we're not paying mana and just paying our life, we're going to get away with a lot of things that we shouldn't be. Next, there's Imhotep the Stormlord. Whenever 1 or more artifact cards leave your graveyard, create 2 2/2 black Necron Warrior creature tokens, and also it has at the beginning of combat on your turn, another target artifact creature you control gets +2/+2 and gains menace until end of turn. So we're going to be able to trigger these multiple times, and the Peregrine Dynamo only costs 3 mana. The last legendary creature is Trazyn the Infinite. As long as this is on the battlefield, it has all activated abilities of all artifacts in your graveyard. The next card I would consider adding is Metalworker. So this is a big money card, at least $100, so we can tap it to reveal any number of artifact cards in our hand, and we're going to add 2 colorless to our mana pool for each card revealed this way. So we could potentially show our whole hand and get, assuming it's 7 cards, 14 colorless mana that we can actually use on casting our cards. Next, let's talk about Foundry Inspector. So this is going to make our artifact spells cost 1 less to cast, and since we are very heavy in the artifact theme, we're going to use this card a lot. Next, let's talk about Lithoform Engine. So we can start copying activated or triggered abilities we control and choose new targets for them. We can even copy instants and sorceries we control, or even copy permanents we control. This is a very powerful card all over, and is multi-purposeful as well. Another pretty pricey card coming in around $15 is Mycosynth Golem. So this has affinity for artifacts, and it also gives artifact creature spells we control affinity for artifacts. So they're going to cost a lot less whenever we have a lot of artifacts on the battlefield. Next is Horizon Stone. So instead of losing unspent mana, it's actually going to become colorless instead, which is completely fine because we are a monocolor deck that happens to be artifact themed, so we can really take advantage of this card that happens to be an artifact as well. The last potential upgrade I want to talk about is Mirrorworks. So this is an artifact that says whenever another non-token artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 2, and if you do, we create a token that's a copy of that artifact, which is great because all of our creatures are going to be artifacts, so we're going to be getting a lot of value from this card. So overall, I think this deck is really sweet. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Are you going to be buying this one? I'm really considering it. I've been trying not to buy too many precons because what happens is I have too many and then I never play any of them. So again, let me know if you're going to be buying this one, and I'll be talking about the rest of the decks as well. So be sure to check out those videos, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.